All right, let's jump right into this explainer. For centuries, concepts like the divine incarnation and the Trinity have been treated by a lot of folks as just, well, unquestionable religious dogmas. But what if we looked at them a totally different way? I want you to think of these not just as ancient beliefs, but as profound, locked-room philosophical mysteries. Seriously, how can one single person be both fully human and fully divine? Or how can one God exist as three completely distinct persons? At first glance, these are puzzles that seem, frankly, mathematically and logically impossible. But here's the thing. To solve them, we don't actually need blind faith. We need precise logical tools. So today, we're going to play the role of the logical detective, and we're using philosophy to unlock these divine mysteries.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the theological puzzles in logic, then move right into the God-man paradox, and unpack what human nature really means. After that, we'll explore the two minds theory, tackle the Trinity dilemma, and finally, wrap it all up by decoding divine identity.
Okay, Section 1. Let's start with the theological puzzles and the rules of logic.
You see, early church thinkers really struggled with these mysteries because, frankly, they lacked a vital framework. Without the right philosophical tools, a bunch of heresies actually popped up just from trying to make sense of it all. So to solve these puzzles, we absolutely have to set some ground rules. First, we need to distinguish between a contradiction and a paradox. A contradiction happens when you affirm and deny the exact same proposition in the exact same way. That's a hard, logical dead end, no way around it. A paradox, on the other hand, is an apparent contradiction. It looks like a contradiction on the surface, but when you really inspect it, it's not. Oh, and let's throw one more term in the mix, a mystery. A mystery is simply a truth that human reason just can't fully grasp. It might involve a paradox, but crucially, it doesn't involve a strict contradiction. Keep these tools in your back pocket because we are definitely going to need them.
Moving on to Section 2, the God-man paradox. One person, two natures.
So the Orthodox Christian view asserts that Jesus Christ is one person with two natures. But come on, how can someone be 100% human and 100% divine? Basic math tells us 100 plus 100 equals 200, right? It just seems logically incoherent to be a completely divine God-man while truly remaining human. To crack this open, we're going to lean on a logical toolkit provided by philosopher Thomas Morris. Morris tackled this exact issue head-on, and to solve it, he really forces us to reconsider the word essence.
The absolute crucial point here is understanding the difference between two types of essence. An individual essence is made up of all the unique properties that make you, well, you. It's your highly specific collection of personal traits. A kind essence, though, is defined by the properties necessary to belong to a specific class. So, for example, to have the kind essence of a mammal, you absolutely must have certain traits, like lungs, hair, being a vertebrate, the whole shebang. So how does this actually solve our God-man paradox? Well, according to Morris, saying Jesus is one person with two natures simply means his individual essence, who he uniquely is, contains all the properties of a fully humankind essence right alongside all the properties of a fully divine kind essence. It's one individual completely holding the requirements for two distinct classes.
Which brings us to Section 3, unpacking human nature and essential properties.
Any good detective knows you have to look for holes in your own theory. For instance, if Jesus wasn't conceived by a human father, doesn't he inherently lack a necessary human property? How could he possibly possess a humankind essence? Well, to answer that, we reach back into our toolkit and pull out another distinction, the difference between essential and common properties. Essential properties are the characteristics you literally must possess to be in a class, like having a mind to be considered human. Common properties, however, are just possessed by most members, but not all of them. Having two hands is a common property, sure, but someone born with one hand is still undeniably 100% human.
Let's apply this directly to that specific objection. Take a look at this list of common but non-essential traits. I love this one. Let's call it the belly button problem. Nearly every single human on Earth has a navel scar. It is so ridiculously common we don't even think twice about it. But imagine you met someone whose umbilical cord healed perfectly without a scar. They wouldn't suddenly stop being human, right? Furthermore, think about the very first humans, Adam and Eve, assuming you treat them as historical figures. They definitely wouldn't have had belly buttons, and they absolutely wouldn't have had human fathers. And yet, they were fully human. So being conceived by a human father is a highly common trait, for sure. But logically speaking, it is absolutely not an essential one.
But wait, we've got another objection. Jesus walked on water and read minds. Doesn't doing that disqualify his humanity? Well, the solution here lies in a super important distinction: being merely human versus being fully human.
To be fully human, you only need to possess the essential traits of humankind. You don't have to be merely human. Jesus was fully human, but because he also possessed divine qualities, he was not merely human. I like to think of it as human plus infinity. As long as those divine properties don't directly contradict the essential human properties, the logic holds up perfectly.
All right, Section 4. The Two Minds Theory, a narrative puzzle.
Okay, so in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24, Jesus explicitly states that he does not know the hour of his return, only the Father knows. Now, this is a massive theological curveball. Because if Jesus is fully divine, he must be omniscient, right? All-knowing. So what if Jesus didn't know everything? Does this just completely shatter our entire logical framework? Philosophers generally present two main solutions to salvage the logic here. The first is the kenoticist approach. This suggests Jesus basically emptied himself of certain divine qualities, like omniscience, while he was on earth. But a lot of folks argue this fundamentally denies his true divinity. The second approach is Thomas Morris's preference, the two minds view. This proposes that Jesus actually had two minds with an asymmetrical relationship, kind of like computer hardware and software, or maybe your conscious and subconscious minds. The divine mind has total unhindered access to the human mind, but the human mind only accesses what the divine mind actually allows it to. It's a really fascinating, incredibly elegant logical structure. However, as Dr. Spiegel's notes rightly acknowledge, we have to recognize something pretty important here. Even with these brilliant philosophical diffusions, stating that one single person literally operates two completely different minds really pushes the boundaries of our understanding. While we have proven it isn't a strict logical contradiction, the actual mechanics of how this works, well, that remains a deep mystery, and honestly, perhaps a paradox.
Moving to Section 5, the Trinity Dilemma, 3 in 1.
The Orthodox doctrine asserts a triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which is drawn from ancient scriptures like the Great Commission. But man, this raises an immediate, glaring objection. How on earth can God be both three and one without being a blatant contradiction? This is a super common critique. For instance, a lot of Muslim scholars understandably, though mistakenly, interpret the Christian Trinity as sheer polytheism. They look at it and believe Christians are just worshiping three totally separate gods. Let's map this out to see exactly where the confusion lies. Over on the left, we see modalism. This is the idea that God simply changes masks or modes, lacking any true plurality. Then, right in the middle, is tritheism, which is the idea that there are three completely distinct beings. Now, this actually is polytheism, and it's considered a heretical extreme in Christian theology. Finally, on the right, that represents the orthodox mean. God is one being, or essence, but three persons. To understand how one person can originate from another without being a creation, just think of human procreation. A human father begets a child. The father doesn't create a brand new species, he procreates, perpetuating the human essence. Similarly, the Son is begotten, not created, sharing the exact same divine essence.
And that brings us to Section 6, Decoding Divine Identity. The is of identity. To completely close the loop on this, we need one final, highly elegant tool, and this one is rooted in the very grammar of language itself. We have to distinguish between the is of identity and the is of predication. Let's use a rather dramatic example. When I say Jocasta is Oedipus's mother, I'm using the is of identity. I am saying Jocasta and Oedipus's mother are one and the exact same person, which was a horrifying realization for Oedipus that historically caused him to tear his own eyes out. Though, as Dr. Spiegel humorously notes in his lecture, tearing out your own eyes seems like a culturally extreme reaction to bad news. Anyway, compare that to saying Jocasta is blonde. I am not saying Jocasta is the literal, physical embodiment of the concept of blondness. I'm using the is of predication. I'm simply saying she has the characteristic of being blonde.
Now apply this linguistic key directly back to the Trinity puzzle. When the doctrine says the Father is God, the Son is God, and the Spirit is God, it is absolutely not using the is of identity. It's not saying the Father physically as the Son. That would be a massive logical trap. Instead, it relies on the is of predication. The Father has the characteristic of being divine. The Son has the characteristic of being divine. They distinctly and uniquely share the characteristic of divinity within one Godhead. As Dr. Spiegel's notes highlight, this incredibly simple linguistic distinction elegantly diffuses the entire accusation of a logical contradiction. By just understanding how the word is functions, either as identity or as predication, we resolve what initially looked like an insurmountable mathematical error, revealing it instead to be a logically sound philosophical framework.
Which leaves us with this final thought. We've used tools like individual versus kind essence, essential versus common properties, and identity versus predication to unlock some of the oldest philosophical mysteries in human history. We've proven that just because something is a mystery, it definitely doesn't mean it's a contradiction. So I have to ask you, where else in your worldview might you be confusing a paradox for a contradiction? What other locked doors in your life are just waiting for the right logical key? Take these tools, apply them, and keep investigating. Thanks for joining this explainer.